There is a stretch of Atlantic coastline that spent most of the 20th century as the most desired address in America. Supermodels walked it. Mobsters owned it. A television show resurrected it from near ruin. Then, quietly, something fundamental broke. This is the story of how South Beach built itself into a legend, and why that legend may be the very thing destroying it. Swamp, sand, and one man's audacity. Before the neon and the Pastel hotels, South Beach was a barrier island nobody particularly wanted. Mosquitoes, mangroves, a strip of sand between Biscayne Bay and the open Atlantic with no obvious future. The first serious development attempt came in 1870, when Henry and Charles Lum purchased 165 acres for a coconut farm. It failed. What changed the trajectory was John Collins, who connected the island to the mainland with a wooden bridge in 1913. Collins provided access. Carl Fisher, an Indianapolis industrialist who made his fortune manufacturing automobile headlights, built something from it. Fisher dredged Biscayne Bay, used the fill to enlarge the island, raised mangroves, and began selling oceanfront parcels to wealthy northern buyers. By the 1920s, Miami Beach was in a full land boom. Then came two consecutive disasters. The Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 left 25,000 people without homes. The Great Depression followed before anyone had recovered. The original wave of grand Mediterranean revival hotels went quiet. The visions simply ran out of money. What emerged from that wreckage was something nobody planned. With land cheap and budgets lean, architects built smaller, more economical structures throughout the 1930s, in a style that would define the place permanently. Art Deco. Geometric, streamlined, optimistic. South Beach's version absorbed nautical motifs, curved facades, porthole windows, and deep eyebrow ledges designed to shade interiors from the Florida sun. The principal architects, Henry Hohauser and L. Murray Dixon, both New Yorkers, understood that building for the tropics required an entirely different logic. Between roughly 1923 and 1943, over 800 structures went up, creating the most concentrated Art Deco district anywhere on Earth. One thing worth clarifying: the famous candy colors were not original. Most buildings were painted white or cream when first constructed. The tropical palette, the turquoise, coral, and seafoam, came in the 1980s, when designer Leonard Horowitz persuaded property owners to embrace it. It worked so completely that the pastels now feel historically inevitable. By 1941, nearly 2 million tourists had visited in a single year. When the Army Air Corps took over the hotels as wartime barracks, South Beach's identity as an American institution was already fixed. The soldiers who trained there remembered it. Many came back as civilians. The years when the Rat Pack called it home. The post-war decade transformed the place. Returning veterans had money, a hard-won taste for leisure, and nowhere obvious to spend either. South Beach had sun, sand, and a collection of new hotels along Collins Avenue that competed with anything in the world. Lincoln Road was known as the Fifth Avenue of the South. Frank Sinatra performed there, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. Jackie Gleason relocated his variety show to Miami Beach in 1964, regularly telling viewers it was the greatest audience on Earth. The Beatles performed there in February 1964. The organized crime dimension ran parallel and was never hidden. Al Capone maintained his winter residence on Palm Island from 1928, and Meyer Lansky died in a Collins Avenue apartment in 1983. The glamour and the danger were always adjacent. For a certain kind of visitor, that adjacency was part of the appeal. But the mechanisms of decline were already operating. By the late 1950s, South Beach had been packaged and sold so aggressively that it had started feeling less like a discovery and more like a commodity. Then jet travel arrived. By the early 1970s, Americans could reach the Caribbean, the Bahamas, or Mexico for comparable prices. South Beach's monopoly on accessible tropical escape evaporated almost overnight. The grand hotels became retirement residences. An estimated 20,000 elderly Jewish residents on fixed incomes lived in South Beach by the late 1970s. The place that had hosted Sinatra was now hosted bingo nights. City planners were actively discussing bulldozing the entire Art Deco district for modern towers. That outcome was narrowly prevented by Barbara Baer Capitman, who co-founded the Miami Design Preservation League in 1976. After 3 years of fighting developers and officials, she won. In 1979, the Miami Beach Art Deco district became the first 20th century neighborhood listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The buildings were saved. The destination was not yet. The television show that rebuilt a city. Nobody designed the recovery. It arrived because a network needed a location. When Miami Vice premiered on NBC in September 1984, executive producer Michael Mann described the Miami he found as a landscape of bland war surplus beige. Parts of South Beach were blighted enough that the production team made emergency repairs to deteriorating facades before cameras rolled, sometimes without filming permits because there was no one around to enforce them. What Mann did was treat those crumbling pastels and fading neon as cinema. The show ran 5 seasons. What it left behind was a transformed perception. Miami Beach went from retirement colony to somewhere young people actually wanted to be. Developers who watched the crew rehabilitate derelict buildings for the cameras began doing the same with their own capital. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, a genuine renaissance took shape. The Cardozo, the Leslie, the Carlisle were purchased and restored. Modeling agencies opened on Ocean Drive. Fashion photographers discovered that the Art Deco facades made extraordinary backdrops. South Beach became the center of international fashion photography. Then, Gianni Versace bought a Mediterranean revival mansion at 1116 Ocean Drive in 1992 for $2.95 million. Installed a 54-foot pool lined with 24-karat gold tiles, and hosted gatherings that placed Ocean Drive in an entirely different category of prestige. On July 15, 1997, he was shot and killed on his own front steps by serial killer Andrew Cunanan. The murder shocked the world, and, in a paradox specific to South Beach's character, cemented its reputation as a place where wealth and danger genuinely coexisted. Art Basel launched in 2002. The Super Bowl arrived. Property values climbed without stopping. A neighborhood that had been blighted 2 decades earlier was now among the most coveted addresses in the Western Hemisphere. The price of being famous. Here is where the trap closes. Places that become famous for being cool tend to have the cool slowly displaced by the fame. Hotel rates during peak season now routinely exceed $500 a night at mid-range properties. A cocktail at a visible bar runs $17 to $25. Dinner for 2 at a recognized restaurant reaches $300 to $400 before gratuity. Miami Beach's cost of living sits 38% above the national average. The average daily hotel rate across Miami-Dade in early 2025 was $258. What that does over time is methodically eliminate the middle. The visitors who came in the 1990s, when South Beach still felt like a discovery, when it was exciting and attainable, eventually stop coming. When a casual 2-night visit costs $600 a day before anything unplanned occurs, you recalculate. You go somewhere else. Miami-Dade County welcomed 28.23 million visitors in 2024. generating $22 billion in direct spending. Record numbers. But those figures cover considerable territory beyond South Beach specifically. On the ground, business owners on Ocean Drive described a different reality. David Wallach, owner of Mango's Tropical Cafe, put it plainly. Revenue across the Strip was down 30%. Hours were cut. Institutions were contracting. 3 years of curfews and a public identity crisis. Alongside the pricing problem, a second crisis developed, one that proved harder to manage because it lived on camera. South Beach's spring break difficulties accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Florida stayed open while most of the country locked down, and the area absorbed an unplanned surge of visitors with nowhere else to go. Over 3 consecutive years, 2022, 2023, and 2024, South Beach declared states of emergency and imposed overnight curfews. In March 2023, 2 people were shot and killed on Ocean Drive in separate incidents over a single spring break weekend. The city's response escalated. In 2024, Miami Beach Mayor Stephen Miner announced the crackdown with language that said exactly what the city was thinking. "We are breaking up with spring break." Sidewalk cafes on Ocean Drive were shuttered during peak March weekends. City garage parking was set at $100 flat to deter day trippers. Beach access closed at 6 p.m. A midnight curfew covered everything south of 23rd Street for the 3rd year running. The measures drew significant criticism from civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, which argued they disproportionately targeted the large black crowds associated with Urban Beach Week, a Memorial Day tradition since around 2001. That debate is real and unresolved. What is not in dispute is that for several consecutive years, spring break generated disorder that drove away the visitors the city depended on and created a global news image that the marketing budget could not easily undo. Wallach estimated the removal of outdoor seating would cost him 30 to 35% of his revenue. The gap between the perception of South Beach as glamorous and the reality of operating a business there had become uncomfortable. The competition that didn't need to try hard. While South Beach managed its identity crisis, the city surrounding it was quietly becoming too interesting to ignore. Wynwood didn't exist as a destination before 2009. It was a warehouse district. Then Wynwood Walls opened, an outdoor installation of large-scale murals by internationally known artists, and within a few years, it had become one of the most photographed neighborhoods in Florida. It offered what South Beach increasingly couldn't: affordability, discovery, and the feeling of being in on something. The Miami Design District developed into a serious luxury and art destination. Brickell matured from an office district into a genuine urban neighborhood. Art Basel's satellite events spread across the city, with several of the most talked-about installations located nowhere near the beach. Miami became a multi-neighborhood city. South Beach became one option among several, and not always the obvious choice for a visitor in their 40s arriving for a long weekend. The question answered itself for a growing number of people. And the deeper problem is that this competition required no extraordinary commitment to choose. It wasn't asking anyone to change their flight or significantly adjust their budget. It was asking them to cross a different causeway. Losing visitors to your own backyard is a harder problem than losing them to another city. What South Beach is now. None of this means South Beach is finished. The overall Miami-Dade visitor numbers are at record highs. Art Basel still arrives each December and briefly makes South Beach the capital of the global art market. The Art Deco district, 960 protected historic structures along Ocean Drive, Collins, and Washington Avenue, remains one of the most architecturally significant streetscapes in North America. The beach itself hasn't gone anywhere. But the version of South Beach that existed between roughly 1995 and 2005, simultaneously glamorous, attainable, and genuinely electric, is gone. What replaced it is more expensive, more controlled, and considerably less spontaneous. City officials have discussed diversification, business travelers, family programming, cultural events. Commissioner Mark Samuelian argued publicly that Miami Beach needed to reduce its dependency on tourism altogether, noting that COVID, Hurricane Irma, and Zika had each demonstrated the cost of single industry reliance. These are reasonable ideas. They are also somewhat in conflict with the DNA of a place that became famous precisely because it was beautiful, excessive, and a little irresponsible all at once. The neon is still on. The pastels still catch the late afternoon light. But the South Beach that lives in collective memory is now more memory than present tense. Assembled over decades, photographed relentlessly, sold aggressively, overloaded, and now being renegotiated in real time. The rise was exceptional. The peak was genuinely golden. And the decline is unfolding the way these things always do. Not through a single dramatic collapse, but through an accumulation of rising prices, difficult seasons, and a growing number of people who looked at what South Beach had become and quietly chose somewhere else. South Beach got exactly what it wanted. The cost was everything that made it worth wanting in the first place.